Hello and welcome to this episode of our series on data protection and pensions, brought to you by the pensions team at Gowling WLG. I'm Ian Chapman Curry and I've been dealing with all things data as the pensions industry gets ready to comply with the GDPR. As always, you can get more information on this and all our other pension insights at www.gowlingwlg.com/pensions-UK. In this episode, we'll be looking at what pension scheme trustees will need to communicate to members in the form of privacy or fair use notices. Data controllers are required to share certain information with individuals whose personal data they process. The GDPR specifies what should be included in this information and how it should be written. Key points from this episode are that data controllers have to provide information to data subjects. In the pensions context, this will mean trustees issuing information to members and other beneficiaries. These statements are also known as privacy notices or a fair use notice. The style of privacy notice is also specified. The GDPR is keen to ensure that privacy notices are as user-friendly and accessible as possible. Trustees will need to issue privacy notices in plain English and ensure that they are intelligible. Privacy notices must cover specified information. The GDPR sets out the information that must be contained in a privacy notice. This includes general information such as the name and contact details of the data controller, along with more detailed information such as the purpose and legal grounds for the processing. Privacy notices have to be issued. Privacy notices have to be issued to data subjects. This means that they have to be actively sent rather than passively displayed. In practice, for schemes that do not primarily communicate online, this is likely to mean sending a summary or signpost by letter or email rather than sending the full privacy notice in the post. So what are privacy notices? Under the GDPR, data controllers are required to provide certain information to individuals whose personal data they process. This information is often referred to as a privacy notice, but it can also be called a fair use notice, a data protection notice, or a data protection statement. So what form can privacy notices take? The GDPR doesn't actually specify a particular form for privacy notices. The information can be provided in a variety of ways and doesn't have to be set out in a single document or on a single web page. The ICO has confirmed that privacy notices can be provided orally, for example in recorded telephone messages or as part of a script that's read out as part of accessing telephone-based services. Or they can be provided in writing, for example as a printed letter or statement. The ICO has stated that it is good practice to use the same medium that you use to collect the personal information to deliver privacy notices. For many pension schemes, this may suggest that a printed notice issued to individuals in the post, or at least a printed summary together with a signpost of where the online privacy notice is to be found, would represent good practice. So what should privacy notices include? In order to comply with the GDPR, privacy notices should set out the identity and contact details of the data controller and, if applicable, the identity and contact details of the data protection officer, the legal grounds for the data controller to process the personal data. If one of the legal grounds is that processing is necessary to pursue the data controller's or a third party's legitimate interests, the privacy notice should also explain what the legitimate interests are, whether the personal data is shared with a third party. This should include details of transfers of personal data outside of the European Union, how long the personal data is kept for, or the criteria for determining how long the personal data is kept for, each of the data subject rights, including the right to withdraw consent if this is applicable, and the data subject's ability to lodge complaints with the ICO, and the existence of automated decision-making, including profiling. If the individual has provided their personal data to the data controller, for example in a pension scheme, the member has filled in a form and given this to the trustee, the privacy notice should explain whether the personal data is required as part of a statutory or contractual requirement, and set out what the possible consequences of failing to provide the personal data are. If the individual did not provide their personal data, for example it came from another source such as the member's employer, the privacy notice should explain how the data controller obtained the personal data and set out the categories of personal data that the data controller processes. Pension schemes have a large amount of personal data that can come from different sources. Trustees may decide to cover all of the required elements so that the privacy notice will apply whether the information came from the individual or from another source. So how should privacy notices be written? As well as specifying what needs to be in a privacy notice, the GDPR sets out how they should be written. In order to comply with the GDPR, privacy notices should be concise, easily accessible, intelligible, written in plain English, transparent, and available free of charge. So, do trustees have to send privacy notices to members? There isn't a single right answer that applies to all data controllers. It'll depend on how the trustee usually communicates with its members. For example, if it already uses an online platform to handle member queries, the answer will be different to a client that relies on paper-based communication. It's also going to be relevant to look at the characteristics of the membership. Are the members all online? Do they all have email addresses? Do most of the members still work for the employer? And what the trustee has already done in respect of any privacy statements. What are the main things that pension scheme trustees will have to do next? The first is to draft or review the scheme's privacy notice. Privacy notices require a lot of information, and it might therefore be more efficient to draft them towards the end of a data protection compliance project. If you already have a privacy notice in place, you'll need to review it in order to confirm that it meets all of the requirements set out in the GDPR. You'll need to determine whether any third parties will be covered by your privacy notice. As part of the data mapping process, trustees should have identified any third parties who are joint controllers in respect of the scheme's personal data. Trustees might need to consider whether these third parties should be included in the scheme's privacy notice. And trustees are going to decide how to send their privacy notices. Trustees are also going to have to decide when they will send their privacy notice and how they will send it. Many pension scheme trustees will issue privacy notices by sending a letter or email to members containing a summary of the relevant data protection information and a clear signpost to where the member can get the full data protection policy online. If there is already a communication being planned, the privacy notice could be included as a separate document as part of that communication. And then trustees are going to have to think about how they will update their privacy notice if there are material changes in the future. Privacy notices may need to be updated in the future. If the trustee has indicated that future updates will be made to an online privacy notice, it will be a lot easier for updates to be made to the online version rather than sending hard copy versions. But it's important to note that in certain circumstances, trustees may need to communicate important fundamental or material changes in the usual communication channels, so that might mean by post or email. And if that has whet your appetite for all things data protection, don't forget there is far more information available at www.gowlingwlg.com. We've made all of these episodes available to read, watch or listen to whenever you want. Please do share them with anyone who is dealing with data protection issues. Thanks for making the time to join us. I hope you can join us for another episode of Gowling WLG's Data Protection and Pension series soon.